All right, State, I think we were in the middle of Detective Pfister's testimony. Is that where you'd like to begin?
Yes, Your Honor, you can call her in.
You may.
Ms. Pfister, affirm the testimony to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Your Honor, may I proceed?
Yes, ma'am.
Detective Pfister, last night we left off starting with the suspect car. I'd like to rewind just a moment, going back to the crime scene where you collected a number of shell casings. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you swab some of those casings that you, actually the casings that you found at the crime scene?
Yes, ma'am, we did.
Okay, can you explain to the members of the jury how you collect DNA swabs?
How we collect DNA swab, it's very similar to a Q-tip that they have in your drawer in the bathroom. However, ours are actually have paper over it, so they're sterile. We open them up, wearing clean gloves. We place 1 drop of distilled water on the Q-tip, and then we swab the casing. We swab the head stamp and along the sides. Then that Q-tip is placed right back into the sterile packaging and then placed in an envelope and placed into the property room.
Does the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office work with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement regularly?
Yes, ma'am, that we do.
Does the Florida Department of Law Enforcement help train you as a crime scene detective on how to collect DNA for their purposes in analyzing?
I have taken a small class with FDLE to obtain swabs.
Now, I want to specifically focus your attention on touch DNA. Can you see that with the naked eye?
No, ma'am.
Okay. And has FDLE asked you all if you have similar items of evidence to swab with only 1 swab?
Yes, ma'am. If we have in a group of casings in the roadway and they're all 9mm, we're going to swab the 9mm with 1 swab. Let's say that you have some 9mm and maybe a .223 round in that same area. The .223 round will have a separate swab, but the like items in that grouping will have the same swab.
Throughout this testimony.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. We saw this yesterday, which would be State's Exhibit 300, 301, 302, 303, 304, 305, 306, and 307. We saw this yesterday.
Yes, ma'am.
You recognize that?
Yes, ma'am.
Now I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 370. Is that the touch DNA swab that you took from these exhibits?
Yes, ma'am, it is. It's for casings 1 through 8 that were in the roadway in front of 710 Spearing Street.
Okay. So you used 1 swab on all of these 9mm casings?
Yes, ma'am.
And is that because they were all found in a similar location?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Now I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 321 and 371. Is this the swab from the 223 casing that you found by the shed?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And now I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 323, which is a .45 caliber casing that you found on the other side of the fence near 716 Spearing Street.
Yes, ma'am.
And then State's Exhibit 372. Did you swab that casing with 1 swab?
Yes, ma'am.
Is 1 swab associated with those single casings?
Yes, ma'am. With the single casing that was at 716 Spearing Street on the side of the house, it has its own swab because it's a .45, and it wasn't in the same location or the same caliber as the ones that were in 710 Spearing Street in the roadway.
All right. Thank you.
Sorry.
Now I'd like to go back to the suspect vehicle. Was that transported, once it was recovered, to the sheriff's office warehouse as Ms. Brown's car was transferred to the warehouse to work on?
Yes, Ms. Brown.
Tamisha Brown's white Corolla, the victim's
I'm sorry.
vehicle?
Sorry, yes. I was already there processing Aiden's mother's vehicle, and Detective Kipple, who's in our unit, actually followed that vehicle to the warehouse while we were there.
Okay, so similar to the car that Aiden McClendon was transported, that happened similarly with the suspect vehicle, is that right?
Yes, ma'am. Same procedures. The doors in the trunk and the hood were all sealed with evidence tape prior to being transferred to the warehouse.
Okay. Showing you State's Exhibit 269, do you recognize that?
Yes, ma'am. That is the suspect vehicle right after it was placed into the warehouse.
And you indicated that that car was sealed when it came into the warehouse?
Yes, ma'am. If you look right here and right here on the driver's side of the vehicle, and you can see it on the hood too, those are the evidence seals that we placed prior to being towed to the warehouse.
And so what does that indicate to you?
That nobody's been in the vehicle since it left the location where it was picked up by Detective Kipple.
On this vehicle, I want to direct your attention to the windows. Was there extremely dark tint that was on these windows?
Yes, ma'am. There was I don't recall the exact number of the tint, but they were actually, the tent was on the outside of the vehicle. When you get vehicles tinted, they actually place the tent on the inside. This is actually on the outside of the vehicle.
Showing you State's Exhibit 270 is at the passenger side with the seals.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and does the tent continue on the front window, passenger window, and then on the other side too?
Yes, ma'am.
Showing you State's Exhibit 271, what is that?
When I was walking around the vehicle right after it was placed in the warehouse, I noticed a casing right here underneath the windshield wiper, closer to the passenger side of the vehicle.
Okay. State's Exhibit 272, is that a close-up of that casing?
Yes, ma'am. That's a closer-up view photograph of that casing that is near the windshield wiper.
State's Exhibit 273, unlike the passenger and the driver's side, was the back window tinted like that?
No, ma'am, it was not.
And then the tag on this vehicle, what type of tag is that?
That's a temporary tag.
Is that something that you would get, I guess, if you just got the car?
If you just purchased a vehicle, you can get that from the DMV. It's not a permanent metal tag that most of us have after we've had a car for a little bit.
State's Exhibit 274, actually, let me go past that. The tent, and was that collected off of this vehicle?
Yes, ma'am, it was.
Prior to the tent being collected, was it examined to see if you could see any fingerprints or anything like that?
We visually inspected the tent there at the scene. I was also working with our latent print examiner, and we decided to remove the tent so he could take it back to the lab and process it in a more controlled environment.
Okay. And you mentioned the latent print examiner. Did he actually come out and help you in processing this vehicle?
Yes, he did.
Can you explain to the members of the jury what latent prints are and what you're looking for?
What the latent prints are, is on the tips of your fingers, you'll see those tiny lines, grooves, dots, and whorls and swirls. What that is the oils and the proteins in your skin. When you touch something, you're leaving behind your fingerprint. And that's what we're looking for when we use, normally it's called black powder, and we use a brush similar to the consistency of baby powder, and we twirl it on an object where we don't know if there's a print to see if any latent prints actually do come to the surface.
And did you do this, that is the latent lifts, off the exterior of this vehicle?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Okay. I'm going to show you what's marked as 345. Do you recognize that?
Yes, ma'am, it's the window tint for the passenger side front rear end vent.
Okay, and you're reading off the bag, is that?
Yes, ma'am,
To
it's-
help you indicate
yes.
where that came from?
What we wrote on the bag that night, and my initials and signature on the seal on the back.
Okay, and 344,
This is the window tint from the driver's side front rear end vent for the suspect vehicle. It's the lettering, and then my initials are on the back.
okay. So this tint was placed placed on the outside of those windows.
Yes, ma'am.
And then State's Exhibit 390, if you could take a moment, open that envelope and see if you recognize those cards inside.
Yes, ma'am. These are the latent lift cards where I've actually lifted prints off the suspect vehicle. And this is what I've submitted into the latent print unit for examination.
Okay, hold on. Do you document where these lifts came from on the back of the card?
Yes, ma'am. On the back of the card, I have our signal for a case. In this instance, it's a 5. That's our signal for a murder. The case number for this case, the victim, I didn't know the victim's name at that time. The location that I'm processing, which it was 1089 Haynes Street, and then the location of the lift, and then I draw a little diagram indicating where I lifted it from.
Okay. And then the back of this card, these are all similar, so we'll just use this one. This tape that's coming across, what is that?
That is where I've actually have what looked like a lift, and I place tape, and then I lift it off, and then I place it onto the card. So the lifts are actually on the card.
Okay, and so you don't determine whether these lifts are of value, do you?
No, that goes to our latent print unit where they analyze it from there.
Showing you State's Exhibit 275, what is this a photograph of?
That's a photograph of the front compartment of the vehicle showing that the seat belts on the driver and the front passenger are latched.
And did you take a DNA swab of this area?
Yes, ma'am. I took one from the front passenger compartment, and I also took one from the front, or the driver's compartment.
Okay,
And in this instance, I actually took 2 separate swabs.
okay. And so you took a DNA swab of this area of the car also?
Yes, ma'am.
State's Exhibit 277, what did you do in this area?
I took a DNA swab from there and also photographs from that area, and also searched the area for any evidence in this case.
Actually, let me go back. The way that you mark your DNA swabs from the compartment areas of the vehicle, are those similar to the ones that we've already talked about?
Yes, ma'am. When I process the interior of a vehicle, I label the driver's compartment, it's driver's compartment and interior door. So I swab the seat, I swab the seat belt latches, the steering wheel, the gear shift and then the sides of the door, like where the window button is, where the lock button is, and the side of the door, like where you would lay your hand or your arm would rest on the door. That's what I swab for in the driver's compartment.
Why do you choose those particular areas?
Choose areas where skin or where if you were talking, where your saliva would go onto the steering wheel. I'm swabbing areas where skin to object is going to touch.
I'm going to start with this one. You mainly did latent lifts on the outside of this car, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 375. Is that a DNA swab from the exterior of the car?
Yes, ma'am. This is the touch DNA swab from the Toyota Corolla front passenger door exterior. In those instances, we do the underneath the door handles where somebody would lift the door handle to open the door.
Was that something nearly impossible to get a latent lift off?
Underneath, it's very difficult to see, for one, and to get the tape up there where if anybody's ever messed with larger tape, it crinkles. So we want to get, that's the best place to get the DNA. We're on the top part of the door handle. I'm actually processing that for latent lifts because it's where I can see it instead of going up where the mechanisms where you would lift up for the door.
Okay. Now I'm going to show you a series which I all believe come from the interior of the car. I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 376.
Yes, ma'am, it's the passenger rear exterior.
All right, 383,
Rear passenger door molding.
381,
Front passenger door and molding.
373,
It's the touch DNA from the driver's front door exterior.
377,
That's touch DNA swab from the interior driver's door.
374,
That's touch DNA from the driver's rear door exterior.
378,
Touch DNA swab from the interior driver's compartment.
380,
Touch DNA swab from interior driver's door compartment.
379,
Touch DNA swab interior rear driver's door.
and then 382,
Touch DNA swab from the front passenger compartment.
384.
Touch DNA swab from rear passenger compartment.
Okay. Are all those swabs that are collected in these series of pieces of evidence consistent with how you collected all what you've just explained for us?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. State's Exhibit 278. Can you tell us what this is a photograph of?
This is a photograph of where the CD player is in the Toyota Corolla.
And what's the screen?
The screen is what is set up on Bluetooth.
Okay. Did you take this, did you turn on the car, turn on the radio, and this is what you saw?
Yes, ma'am. A lot of times I turn on, or what I do is I turn on the radio to see if there's a CD in there, because a lot of times people put CDs in it, and that's where they've touched for latent prints. So I'm seeing if there's actually a CD in there that I can process.
Okay, so we see Z820. That's not your phone connected to this car, is it?
No, ma'am.
Okay, and you're definitely not real nigga KK, are you?
No, ma'am.
All right. Showing you State's Exhibit 279.
That is the engine compartment of the Toyota Corolla?
Were there items found in this location?
Yes, ma'am. I also found 9mm casings in the little pockets here on the passenger side and then on the driver's side. It was underneath the hood, so you could not see it with the hood closed.
Okay. Could you erase that? Thanks. Showing you State's Exhibit 280. What is that?
This is a 9mm casing on the passenger side of the vehicle.
Okay. And is that exactly how you found it?
Yes, ma'am.
State's Exhibit 281, is that a close-up?
That's a close-up of that 9mm casing underneath the hood.
State's Exhibit 282, is that the head stamp for it?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
State's Exhibit 283, is that a photograph of where you found the other casings?
Yes, ma'am. That's on the driver's side of the vehicle.
Okay. State's Exhibit 284, is that a close-up of that?
Yes, ma'am. That's two 9mm casings that were under the hood on the driver's side.
Okay. Is that exactly how you found them?
Yes, ma'am.
State's Exhibit 285, are those the head stamps for those casings?
Yes, ma'am. It's the head stamps of those two casings on the driver's side.
Total, how many casings did you find in the hood area of this vehicle?
4.
Did you take the swabs of those casings for this vehicle?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
I'm going to show you what's been entered into evidence as State's Exhibit 349, 348, 347, and 346. I'm going to give these over to you and tell me if you recognize them.
It's okay. Yes, ma'am. These are the 9mm casings that were underneath the driver's hood.
Okay. The ones that we've seen by photograph, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And then look at these. I think I included an extra one. Just separate out the 9mm swabs that you have there. Okay, thank you.
Just a second.
And then so showing you State's Exhibit 387, 386, and then 385. Are those the 3 swabs that you took of these casings?
Yes, ma'am. This is the touch DNA swab from the 9mm that was near the windshield wiper. This one is the touch DNA swab underneath the hood on the driver's side. There's for one swab for those 2 casings. And this one is the swab for the one on the passenger side.
Okay. Just, this one's a little bit different. This yellow sticker, do you recognize that to be from FDLE?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So those aren't your stickers, that's
No, ma'am.
that they've been analyzed?
No, ma'am. Our sheriff's office sticker are the white ones.
Okay.
And the blue tape is the sheriff's office tape.
Okay. All right. Did you thoroughly search this vehicle?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Okay. Showing you State's Exhibit 86, is that how you found the trunk of this car?
Yes, ma'am. When I photograph a vehicle, I photograph each section of the vehicle as I'm going in to process it. Before I even touch anything in the trunk, when I open it up, I have my camera, I take a photo as is before I've disturbed anything.
Okay. State's Exhibit 287, what is this a photograph of?
In this photograph, I've removed that rear carpet and the umbrella and stuff that you saw in the previous photo. I've removed it from the vehicle, so the only thing left is the tire and the tire jack.
State's Exhibit 288, what is this a photograph of?
That is the rear carpet on the back seat on the passenger side on this side. This is the passenger side, and this is the driver's side rear.
Okay, so that's looking as if you're looking in the trunk with the carpet removed.
Yes, ma'am, looking into the trunk from the opening.
State's Exhibit 289, what is this a photograph of?
In this photograph, I've actually crawled into the trunk, and right here, wedged near the seatbelt latch for the rear passenger side, I actually saw a casing from going from in the trunk, looking down there, and you can see it's right there.
Okay, so, all right, and so that's what you saw when you were taking this car apart, essentially,
Yes, ma'am.
and then, so did you go even further?
Yes, ma'am.
State's Exhibit 290, how'd you get that photo?
Wedging myself up against the rear seat and aiming the camera down in that area.
Okay. State's Exhibit 291, what is this?
That is, I've removed this back seat on the Corolla, and the casing is in this area.
And then 292, is that the casing that you ultimately collected after you removed the seat?
Yes, ma'am. That's the head stamp of a 762 by 39 casing that was wedged by the seatbelt latch.
Showing you what's been entered as State's Exhibit 350. Do you recognize that?
Yes, ma'am. This is the 762 casing that I recovered, and as you see right here, that I recovered from the vehicle.
Okay. And now, did you take a swab of that casing?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
All right, showing you State's Exhibit 388. Is that the swab that you took of this casing that you found in the back seat of the suspect car?
Yes, ma'am. This is the swab where I collected the touch DNA from that casing.
Thank you. Did detectives in this case give you 2 cell phones to collect?
Yes, ma'am, they did.
I'm going to show you what's been marked for identification as 16P and then 16Q. Do you recognize those as the phones that detectives gave you to place into the property room?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Your Honor, it's time to state receipt to introduce 16P and 16Q as the next number of exhibits.
Any objection?
No objection.
Will be so admitted.
16P. I apologize. These are mismarked, Your Honor. This should be, if I may correct them on the actual exhibit tags, this should be 21U. And then 21B is in Victor. If I may have those marked as the next numbered exhibits.
So what are the exhibits?
21U became 455, and 21B became 456.
It will be so admitted without objection.
No further questions?
All right, any cross?
Yes, Your Honor. Morning, Detective Pfister. How you doing?
Good morning, I'm doing well.
Okay. You talked about a number of stated exhibits in the very beginning of your direct testimony, the aerial views,
Yes, sir.
and you talked about the houses behind 710 Spearing Street. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
The houses were located to the north behind 710 Spearing Street. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Albert Street in the aerial views is to the south. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. And the residents 710, 716, and 720 are to the north of Albert Street.
Right. So Albert Street is to the south of the front of 710 Spearing Street. Is that correct?
Correct.
And when you're looking at those aerial views, the stadium, which is on the side of, well, where Spearing Street is that to the east or the west?
From the Jaguar Stadium,
Yes.
it's actually to the west. The Spearing Street and Albert Street, at that intersection, is actually to the west of the stadium where the Jaguars play.
Okay. If I were at the front of the home on Spearing Street, and if I were to face the Jaguar Stadium, which direction is that, the west or the east?
It's to the east. It's actually to the southeast, to be exact.
Of course. And then from the aerial view, if you're looking at the aerial view, to the left of the driveway would be to the west. Is that correct?
Depends on which area you're looking at. You'd have to show me the photograph that you're,
Okay.
you could spin it different directions and it would be left. It
I'll
depends on which
come
way.
back to this because I'll probably have to get the state to help me out with their, I'll show you Status Exhibit 3 before we finish the questioning there, okay? Unless you can put it up right now. if you don't mind. Okay, if you can touch your screen, we're going to go ahead and work with Status Exhibit 4, okay?
Yes, sir.
Have you got your screen up?
Yes, sir, I do.
If you just put a marking where north is, where the row house,
North goes this way. And if you look right here, I've actually drawn one in the road indicating north.
okay. Y'all
And that's-
always do that with these aerial photos, is that correct?
Yes, sir. It helps the air unit when they're taking when the detective goes up to take the photo, it helps orient them what houses they're looking at for one and which direction north is.
Okay, if you got north that way, then south is the opposite direction, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
But could you draw that on the screen there,
You want me to draw north, south, east, west?
where south is?
South is going this way.
Okay,
East is going this way.
that's east. And if you could, west. All right, and if I wanted to just delete this photo, go ahead and turn it off, that'd be it. Sorry about that. You were the lead evidence technician, is that correct?
Yes, sir, I was.
You had other evidence technicians working that night, is that right?
Yes, sir. The detectives that worked with me on the scene for each of the days was Detective Whittlesey and Detective Keeling.
Okay. The lead detective on this case that's not an evidence technician is Detective D.K. Scott, is that correct?
Yes, he was the lead homicide detective from our homicide unit.
You and Detective Scott talk with one another, is that correct?
Yes, sir. We were in constant contact with each other.
Okay. You're directing the other evidence technicians, and you're talking with Detective Scott, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Detective Scott could request for you to do something, is that correct?
Correct.
And then you would normally do it, is that
Yes, sir.
correct?
Yes, sir, I would.
Okay. Did Detective Scott direct you to go to the Gate gas station on the corner of Moncrief and 45th Street and pull the surveillance video or the video from that gas station?
No, sir, he did not.
Okay. And obviously, you didn't do that, is that correct?
No, sir. The detectives that usually go and get the surveillance video are usually the homicide team. They work as a team just like we do in the crime scene unit. And from what I've seen in my 10 years in the crime scene unit, the lead detective will have another detective, I need you to go get this video recording for me or canvass this area, and that's how they do that. My main concentration on this case was the houses at 710, 716, 720 Spearing Street, and the vehicles that I processed. That was my main focus for this entire case.
Okay, so you're unaware of whether that tape or whether there exists a tape at the Gate gas station on 45th Street in Moncrief for the date of 29 January, whether that was obtained, right?
I have no idea.
Okay. If I see Detective Scott, it might be a better question for him, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you take a measurement from from the front of 710 Spearing Street, where the concrete driveway begins, to the Albert Street Road where the shell casings were found? Did you take a measurement to see what the distance was?
From the front of the residence
Yes.
to the roadway, yes, we did.
Okay, what was that distance?
I'd have to refer back to my report to get you the exact number.
Please, if you've got your report there.
On page 7 of my supplemental report, the distance from bullet hole A on the south side of the residence of 710 Spearing Street to Albert Street was 84 feet, 2 inches approximately. And for the court, supplemental number 5 report.
84 feet, 2 inches?
Yes, sir. 84 feet, 2 inches, approximately.
Were you able to determine where Ms. Tamisha Brown's vehicle was parked on the driveway when it first started receiving rounds?
No, sir, nobody can.
Pardon me?
Nobody can.
Okay. Did you question Ms. Tamisha Brown to ask her where it was parked?
No, sir. My main focus in this case is on the evidence, the residents, and the vehicles. I don't talk to witnesses. I don't talk to victims in the cases. That is up to the homicide detectives.
So it's up to the homicide detective to ask these type of questions, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Maybe another question that I need to ask Detective Scott, is that correct?
If that's a question you want to ask him, absolutely.
Did you take a measurement from the marker for shell casing 1 to shell casing 7 for that distance?
I don't believe I did. But when we do our diagrams, the machine that we use is very similar to what surveyors use when they survey roads. We can actually, what we do is we place a pole that has a reflector, and then we have the machine that hits the reflector. So those measurements can actually be taken from measuring on the diagram program from that casing to that case in the approximate distance.
Was it done in this case?
No, sir, but the diagram was completed, yes, sir. So
Pardon me?
the diagram was completed in that manner.
You talked about how a shell casing is ejected from a semi-automatic earlier, whenever you were talking about the shell casings hitting the road and possibly rolling. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
When a shell casing is ejected from a semi-automatic, it's ejected to the right and to the rear. Is that correct?
It can go straight to the right, it can go to the rear. It just depends on what angle the gun was held at the time. If you're cocked a little bit to the left, it's going to go more to the front to the left. If you're more straight on, it's going to start ejecting straight out to the right. And then when it hits, just like I explained yesterday, it's going to hit the concrete, and it's not going to just stick like glue onto the roadway. It's going to bounce, it's going to roll, and things like that.
Okay. And that's the same direction that a shell casing would eject for the rifle, in this case, the Mac. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
State's Exhibit 43 was the glass with the apartment sticker. Do you remember that?
Yes, sir, I do.
That was found on, I believe, Spearing Street. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. It was found in front of 716 Spearing Street in the road in the actual northbound lane of Spearing Street.
There were orange lines going through that. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
There were orange lines basically going through the rear view mirror, the defrosting lines. Is that right?
Yes, sir. From my experience from driving and having cars with rear window defrost, they have the little lines that go from side to side on the back.
Were you able to determine how many lines were in the rear view window that was blown out?
No, the window wasn't there anymore.
But we've got a pattern of those lines that's shown in State's Exhibit 43. Is that correct?
There's a photograph of those lines on that sticker, yes, sir. I couldn't tell you how many lines there were on it. That's why I took a photograph of it to encapsize it for later.
Do you remember how many lines there were on State's Exhibit 43?
As I just stated, I don't know. That's why I took a photograph of it. You would have to put the photograph up and I can count.
The 223 shell casing, you stated that was found by the shed on 710 Spearing Street. Is that correct?
Yes, right at the corner of the property back there.
Okay. That would indicate a shell casing was ejected from a rifle. Is that correct?
.223 round is from a rifle, yes, sir.
The last part of your testimony, or at least the majority of your testimony today has been on the suspect's vehicle, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Can you, if you remember, or if you need to look at your reports, feel free to, when was the suspect's vehicle transported? In other words, when did JSO obtain it, and when was it transported to the warehouse?
Looking back at my report, I'll have to look at the date.
Please, please.
On 2/3 of 2016.
February 3rd?
Yes, sir.
The shell casings that were found in the engine block area of the suspect's vehicle were 9mm, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
The Bluetooth photograph, State's Exhibit 278. The phone says Z820, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Is that a model of a phone?
I have no idea.
Were you able to determine when the Bluetooth was programmed by that phone, a date?
No, sir. The only thing I know is when I turned the car on, that's what popped up.
Are you able to, in your knowledge, are you able to determine, or was there a date indicated when it was programmed?
I have no idea. There's no date that came out on the screen. I'm not electronically savvy when it comes to the Bluetooth. I can barely set my own car.
In the shell casing that was in State's Exhibit 290, 292, in the rear seat that was wedged between the rear seat belt, that was a 7.62 shell casing, is that correct?
Yes, sir. It was a 7.62 by 39 casing.
And that would indicate that it was fired from a rifle, is that right?
It is a rifle round, yes, sir.
And again, the rifle, or the MAC-90 in this case, ejects the shell casing up into the right rear, is that right?
I've never fired that one, but I would assume so, yes, sir.
Pardon me?
I've never fired that MAC-90 that you're talking about,
Okay.
but I would assume so.
Okay. Your Honor, I have no other questions.
All right, Ms. Wright, any cross?
Good morning, Detective.
Good morning.
I have a couple of questions, and it's mainly about the suspect car. Now, you indicated that you took DNA swabs from the suspect vehicle, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
And for the interior driver's door, that's what you labeled that swab, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, for the interior rear passenger door and window molding, that's what you labeled that one, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. I also took along the edge of the molding as if somebody was driving westbound on Albert Street and they're hanging out the vehicle, shooting a firearm, their DNA could possibly be on the outer molding of that vehicle, because it would be
Okay.
on the passenger side.
Okay, so that's why you distinguish between just the interior passenger door and in the back, the interior passenger door and molding?
Yes, ma'am.
So can you tell me, with regard to the interior passenger door, what areas of that door did you swab?
The same as the driver's door that I explained in testimony earlier. I still take the window button, the area where you would lay your hand, the little pocket where the little ashtrays used to be in cars. I still swab that area on the door also.
Okay, and you would have done that for the interior passenger's door. You would have swabbed the top where a person would put their hand, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. I swab doors the same way every single time.
Okay, I don't have any further questions.
All right, redirect.
Detective, can you see State's Exhibit 52 on your screen?
Yes, ma'am. That's the front of 710 Spearing Street.
All right. Mr. Hernandez asked you, did you take measurements from the concrete sidewalk to the area of where those casings were found towards the street?
I took it from the area of where the strikes were in the residence to the roadway.
Okay, so when you were referencing bullet hole A, you're actually on the house.
Yes, ma'am. As
Out
close
to
as
the
I
street.
can with we have a wheel that we can also measure with, so we're actually putting it right on the residence and then going towards where the bullet hole is.
Okay, so you are already up on the house,
Yes, ma'am.
all the way towards the street.
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
And with our diagramming program, when we diagram it that way also to get measurements, the pole is set right where that hole is, and the angling coder is what we call it, is out in the roadway, and it shoots back to where I'm at holding the pole.
All right. Going to State's Exhibit 10. So if someone was parked in this area of the front yard, not the house, but the yard, can you give this jury any accurate measurement of how far that is from that location to the street?
If you have a direct point in this area that you've circled, where we hold the pole, that's how I can give you an accurate measurement. It has to be, so you have a casing right in that area. I'm putting that, it's a point, a surveyor's point, right on top of that location where that point is, and then the angling coder shoots back, hits the reflector, bounces back, and gives the measurement to the computer.
All right, but my question is, do you have that in this case?
No, ma'am, I don't.
And you said you couldn't get it because the car was where when you found it?
When I arrived, I first got to this call, the car was at UF Health at 655 West 8th Street and not at 710 Spearing Street.
All right. You were asked, showing you State's Exhibit 17, the distance between these 9mm shell casings that you found in the street.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and you said that you diagrammed these, but you didn't measure in between these casings.
No, ma'am.
Okay. The fact that these, number 1 is in the street, number 8 is in the dirt, number 7 is down the street, does that tell you anything exactly where the person was shooting from?
No, ma'am. It just tells me where the casing landed and where it was when I got there.
All right. And you indicated, you said, well, counsel asked you, you said, well, when you shoot a firearm, you're assuming that the person is just shooting free and clear, free of any objects, not the fact that they might be an occupant of a car, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So if it shoots out to the right and a little bit backwards, and you are moving the firearm around, could you get a casing that hits on the roof and rolls towards the front?
Absolutely. You got several variables in there. You have, in what she's describing, you have a moving vehicle. You have somebody shooting out of a moving vehicle. So you have, bullets coming out, but you're also moving at the same time. So there's several variables. The person's not sitting there as a sharpshooter doing target shooting, professionally, where the gun is actually stationary on on a table. You have a human being that moves, and so they're not going to be stationary. They're going to be moving like that. If anybody's ever hold a gun, you don't, holding it this way, if you're moving, the gun's going to move with you. If the vehicle's moving, hits a bump, you're going to move with it.
For recoil.
Yes, ma'am.
Tell me what recoil is.
Recoil with our Glock, when you fire, you're going to have that little bit of pullback. If you've ever fired a gun, there's that little pullback. Different caliber guns have different recoils. It just,
But essentially you have a kickback.
yes, ma'am.
So can we take anything from the fact that you found 9mm shell casings in the front of the car? Does that necessarily indicate that the shooter was in the front of the vehicle?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Now, I'm going to take the 7.62 because Mr. Hernandez asked you about that. The fact that you found that 7.62 round wedged in the back seat of that car, assuming that the weapon ejects out to the right and maybe a little bit backwards, if the person shooting is inside of the car and it's kicking out and to the right, where would you expect that round to go?
That round could either go in the rear deck, it could hit the seat, depends on what angle they were holding the firearm. When they were shooting, it could hit the seat and fall between the backrest of the rear passenger seat and the seat cushion, get wedged down in there.
Okay, so can you take really anything from the fact that you found a 7.62 by 39 round wedged in the back seat?
That's where it was.
The fact that the shooter of that weapon was in the back. Can
Correct.
you take anything from that?
It could have bounced from the front all the way to the back. It could have bounced from right there. All I can say is that's where I located that 7.62 by 39 casing wedged between the seat and the cushion.
I don't have any further questions.
May this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
That's right. All right, thank you, Detective. You're excused. All right, State, you may call your next witness.
This case will call Detective Powell.
Ms. Thomas, swear affirm that the testimony you give will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes, ma'am.
Will you please introduce yourself to the juries?
Good afternoon. I'm Sergeant Douglas Paul Howell Jr.
And where are you currently employed?
I'm employed with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office.
For how long?
Almost 16 years, or 15 years, I'm sorry.
Prior to becoming a law enforcement officer with JSO, did you have any prior experience?
Yes, I had almost 2 years of law enforcement experience with the Atlantic Beach Police Department.
Okay. And you are a sergeant now. I called you a detective earlier.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Correct, that's okay.
All right. Prior to becoming a sergeant, where were your assignments within the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office?
Prior to being promoted, I was a detective with the Violent Crimes Impact Team. I did that for just under a year. I was also a detective with the Gang Investigative Unit for almost 7 years. Violent Crimes Task Force for another year. Showdown Task Force for 3.5 years, and then patrol.
Okay. In your current assignment as a sergeant, did you carry on that experience that you had with gang work?
Yes, currently I'm assigned to the Zone 4, which is the west side of Jacksonville, where we have a task force assigned out there, so I'm assigned to that, to run that.
Has been the great majority of your career with the Sheriff's Office in some way, shape, or form entailed working in gang investigations?
Yes, ma'am, it has.
Can you explain that when you were a gang detective and also your work with the impact team, Violent Crime Impact Team, did your training and experience come into use?
Yes, very much so, because we documented gangs, documented gang members, investigated the gangs, and assisted other units within the agency when it came to gang members and gangs.
Tell the jury about your training and experience as it relates to gang work.
Again, like you're saying, majority of my career has been dealing with gangs. When I was on Operation Showdown Task Force, we dealt with high crime areas, which included a lot of the gangs in those areas. So we got to learn and deal with a lot of gangs with a hand-on basis. When I went to the gang unit, we went to several training. I went to multiple training classes all over the United States, including Arizona, St. Louis, several places in Arizona. Florida Gang Investigators Association conference here in Jacksonville. I went to several classes in regards to gang work.
Can you tell us about some of the topics in those trainings?
So the topics included like trends, what they were seeing, some of their positive impacts, how they're dealing with gangs, how they're enforcing their laws, how they're doing long-term investigations, the different trends that they may see for law enforcement for gangs to hide their involvement in gangs from law enforcement. So a lot of that stuff was brought up so it can help all of us in our investigations.
In your work with the Sheriff's Office, do you operate under a Florida statute in order to identify gang members?
Correct. Florida State Statute 874 deals with gang enforcement.
All right. Are you, through your work, familiar with a gang called 1200 Block?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and do they also have a set within that particular gang referred to as 187?
Correct. Yes, they do.
Can you explain to the members of the jury what that gang entails and who some of the members are?
The gang intel 1200 Block is in regards to an area of Jacksonville on the east side, particularly 1212 East First Street is where it kind of created out of, but it encompasses the east side, basically from the northern part of the stadium to about East 7th Street. And then 187 is a entertainment group within the 1200 Block group.
Is there any distinction? Is 187 like not a gang because they call themselves an entertainment group?
No, what gang members are doing nowadays is they're utilizing the entertainment groups because we're enforcing the Florida State Statute 874 on them, on their gangs, and then so they feel they get under a entertainment group that they're protected and they're not gang members. And in fact, they're still doing the same kind of crimes, same kind of activities as they would as a gang member in a geographical area.
And I want to focus your attention. Are you intimately familiar with that gang, 1200 Block and 187?
Yes, I investigated that group for 6.5 years while on my time with the gang unit.
Okay. So much so that the members of that gang, do they know you?
Yes, very much so.
Do you have a nickname within them?
Yes, it's either Big Sofa or Sofa that they refer me as.
Okay. Now, late 2015, I'm talking November to December through, and you're familiar with the case that we're on today, 8 with London.
Yes, ma'am.
During that time period, was 1200 Block or 187 having any particular issues with another rival gang?
Yes, Problem Child Entertainment or PCE.
And do you all work on different gangs? Is there another detective that's assigned to investigate that particular gang?
So each detective is assigned their own particular gangs. So I had 187 1200 Block, while another detective had Problem Child Entertainment, but we work together in regards to these kind of incidents.
Okay, because they're rivals and beefing with one another at that time.
Yes, ma'am, correct.
Through your experience, do you know about where PCE or their territory was located in Jacksonville, Florida?
Correct. At the time that we were dealing with this incident, it was in the 45th and Moncrief area, particularly in the Hilltop apartment complex area.
You need to approach?
Thank you.
But you are approaching the witness.
Oh, I'm sorry. I got used to the other one. May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
I thought you meant sidebar. I apologize. All right. These are kind of big, so. All right, first I'm going to show you what's been marked for identification as 21Y, okay? And then I'm going to show you, can you read that number?
22A.
22A, okay? Do you recognize these two exhibits?
Yes, ma'am.
And do they encompass some of the things that you've already testified to us regarding the members and the territories of the two rival gangs?
Correct, it does, yes.
Your Honor, this time the state would introduce 21Y and 22A.
Any objection?
No objection.
Understood. That would be so admitted.
And also the ones previously made by motions and stuff.
Understood. Those previously noted. It's 21Y
21Y,
and
22A.
22A. Okay.
Your Honor, I have a witness step down, please.
Yes, sir. You may step down, Sergeant. So what are the two exhibits now?
Your Honor, permission to move about the courtroom?
You certainly may, and Ms. Wright, obviously you may as well. Madam Clerk, the
Judge, so 21Y is going to be 457 and 22A is going to be 458.
very good. Thank you.
Sorry, I got something. Can you, see right here, for me and keep your voice up? And publish, State's Exhibit 457 to the jury.
You may.
All right. I'm showing you a chart. Are you familiar with the individuals that are in this particular chart, sir?
Yes, ma'am, there were documented gang members within the 1200 block 187 gang organization.
Okay. Can we show the members of the jury down here? So, through your experience with this gang, have you had contact with a great majority of all these individuals?
Yes, probably every single one of them I've identified and made contact with in my investigations.
Okay. I want to ask you, these two up here, Breon Mason and Keon Mason, are they brothers?
Yes, the brothers,
Okay, and Breon Mason goes by what nickname?
heroes.
And Keon Mason goes by what nickname?
Good.
Is that common for them to use a name other than their given name?
Correct, yes, it is. It self-identifies them within the gang.
Okay. And then Cameron Thomas, are you familiar with him?
Yes, very much so.
All right. Does he own like a hangout for these guys?
Correct, he rented a location out, a house that was utilized as a trap house and a location that they kind of hung out and hid out during their time.
Is that house yellow?
Yes, it is.
Okay. This Miyagi Razor, what nickname does he go by?
Yeah,
And is he a prominent rapper within this group?
he is very much so. He's a kind of a quasi leader, I guess you would kind of say, of the majority of the younger guys.
Okay. Reginald Williams, what's his nickname?
Gucci,
And what about Noel Williams, what's his nickname?
Twin,
Does he also go by
he
Spinavins?
does, yes.
Are you familiar with that term that they use, Spinavins?
Yeah, Spinavins is a terminology they use when they talk about going to do a drive-by shooting. So obviously, his nickname is named that because that's the type of involvement he is in this organization.
Can we show Reginald Ducey Williams down here? In this, point out Reginald Ducey Williams,
Reginald right there.
all right? His brother, twin,
Twin, Noah Williams.
okay? Is there a kind of video that they made called F the City Up?
Yes, they did.
Okay, is Juwan Hazelton in that video?
I don't believe he's in that one, no. Or I'd have to look at it again, but I think he
Okay,
is.
okay. And then Lawrence McCauley, what's his nickname?
This is Little Man. He was definitely in that video as well.
Okay. And oh, I'm sorry. That's important. Andrew McKnight.
Yeah, it's Baker, a little shook.
Okay. Is he beloved by all of these individuals in this particular gang?
He is, once he was murdered out in this area, And after he was murdered, they took on the moniker of Suge Nation to kind of commemorate him.
So they call themselves 187 pretty much before. Do they have T-shirts and things like that made?
They did, yes. They had all kinds of paraphernalia, I guess you could call it, within the gang organization, which includes shirts and hats and stuff.
Your Honor, may I publish State's Exhibit 458?
You may.
Oh,
I moved back. Yes, sir.
sorry. This is what I was asking you earlier. Can you point out the location of the territory of 187 or 1200 block?
It's within this blue box here in the alley, which is the east side of Jacksonville. So pretty much this line right here within this
When we say east side of Jackson, we mean east of downtown?
east of downtown. That's correct.
All right, let's point it out down here. So the area for 1200 block of 187.
Would encompass this blue ball area.
Okay, down here, PCE.
Correct. This is the PC area, which would encompass the red block, particularly where the dogs are at. It's a lot of where they hang.
Okay, down here, PCE.
PCs within the red block area, particularly centralized and where the dogs are at, which is that 45th and Monterey area.
Thanks. If you can take a scan again. Are you familiar with the kind of concentrated hangouts of 1200 block or 187?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
I'm going to show you what's been admitted in as State's Exhibit 449. It's that a more concentrated map into the out east or 1200 block or 187 territory.
Okay, correct.
Are you familiar with that?
I am familiar.
Okay. I'm going to start first with this yellow store.
That's a local hangout for them. They're always situated in front of that building at all days and times.
All right. Did they almost commemorate that store into song?
They did. They made a video called Yellow House, Yellow Store.
And then, not from that song, but did Cam also have a yellow house that's situated directly down the street from that yellow store?
Correct. Yes, at 1148 Pippin Street, he did.
Okay. And are you familiar with the scene involving 710 Spearing Street that we're here on today?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
Is that in close proximity to both of those locations?
Correct. It's several blocks away from each other.
Showing you State's Exhibit 9, are you familiar with that house?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
Is that within the 1200 block or 187 gang territory?
That is, yes.
Your Honor, may we approach sidebar?
You may, do you need the court reporter?
Yes.